Have you ever wondered what is the logic and philosophy behind wars? What are the measurements and rationale national defense agencies around the world use in order to decide if a war is needed, ethical, or appropriate? In this documentary, we're going to first analyze just war theory, explain war theory, analyze the main drawbacks on just war theory. Why is war theory important or relevant and how it connects to modern conflicts such as Palestine and Israel or some other modern invasions or conflicts? Before we begin with this short documentary, if you like political science and international relations content, please subscribe and like the video. In addition, if you have any feedback or questions, be sure to leave it in the comments. War and conflict has been part of human nature since the first civilizations. Due to this, many people, mainly inside the theology community, started asking questions regarding why war happens. Why is it ethical, and how should a war conclude or should be end? This first happens due to many theologians and philosophers asking the simple question, how can we prevent conflict from occurring when there is a competition for the same resources in society? While asking this sort of question, Catholic priests in the Middle Ages such as St. Thomas and St. Augustine developed a theory on how should we as humans mediate in order to prevent further conflicts from occurring, especially when resources are essential and are needed for humans to be alive. It is important to note and mention that we're talking about an era where the church had absolute control and power over society and around the world. So it's very important that the viewer understands that even though this theory refers to the church, we're talking about the government in reality. The first idea on just war theory implies that a state main and most important duty should always be to defend their people in the presence of violence. According to just war theory, violence is appropriate and ethical when this is the best worst option or the less evil option. However, before taking this approach, all the other options must be exhausted, and only then war can be excused or considered ethical. To enter a war, a state must have reasonable chance of success, attempt other options of negotiation, including diplomacy, intentions to do ethical right, meaning not gain any materials or any monetary item. War must be proportional to the cost. For example, if nation Y invades nation X, then X has the power to gain that lost territory, however, nothing less or more. And after answering all these questions, a state must ask themselves, is this war ethical now, and would it be during our intervention? Or after the intervention is over, will this war still be considered ethical? Some examples of this is President Bush's invasion of Iraq, in which ethics and the concept of decency was sold to the American people, and in essence to the United States government. Another example includes the global intervention in Libya in order to prevent Gaddafi from committing a homicide against his own people. The international community decided that the right ethical thing to do was to intervene in the domestic situation in Libya. One important aspect of this theory is that once nation X has successfully gained what they lost, then no further retaliation shall be employed, meaning that trade embargoes or sanctions are not ethical, which is in direct contrast to today's world where sanctions are often placed on countries after war is over. Some examples of this include United States sanctions against Cuba, Iran, and other countries. The reason just war theory does this is because they assume war as a concept is an ethical and just part of life, and part of human nature. War must also be declared by the right authority. For example, a war declared by a militia or a military group or mercenary group should not happen. According to Jstor theory, the reason for war is to protect innocent people from danger, like a homicide or a state government killing his own people or opposition. Jstor theory was also a revolutionary idea because it provided a framework of human rights during a conflict, making it one of the first times in history in which we see these sort of concepts mentioned in a document. Jstor theory mentions that a state may not torture civilians or may not attack people that have surrendered or civilians that are left inside a town that is being invaded by a fort. According to Jstor theory, the state might use the need of force as long as it's not over the top, meaning that nuclear weapons and chemical weapons should never come into play when a war is happening. Jstor theory also provides a framework and some bullet points on how should we make peace and how should it happen. It mentions that if a nation, leader, or government surrenders, war should stop immediately and not keep happening. In addition, treaties must be signed and political prisoners should be returned back to the targeted state. War crime trials and reparations and aid shall be provided in order to prevent war from keep happening. An example of this not being followed is the Allies after World War I and the Versailles Treaty, in which they made Germany pay reparations in addition to other dues. War theory is considered a morality school of idea, in which, yes, the human is born into an anarchy and as a lawless human, but we should strive to ensure that we don't live in a state of anarchy. War theory also provides some insights what will happen if these steps for resolutions are not followed. They mention that we should see a civil war trap, which is a concept that once a nation enters a war or a civil war, it's just the beginning of many more uprisings, since a nation that cannot leave its differences behind or in the past will never get out of war. South Africa shows a great example of this. When racism was finally banned in the country, they held a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in which people would confess their crimes and racist actions, and victims will accept an apology. South Africa recognized that the only path forward in order to develop and decrease hatred towards the population and among the population was the reconciliation route. And this is a great example of how Jstor theory thinks about human and war as a concept. First, it assumes we know all the game options, or the actions a state might take. A great example of this is during World War II, many states didn't know about the atrocities the Nazis were committing. When we finally started receiving images and news about it, it had already been happening for a few months. Second, Jstor theory assumes that the states are ethnocentric, or that only one culture lives inside a state, and therefore it assumes everyone in a state has the same goals and objectives, when in reality this is not how it works. The reason for this assumption is because Jstor theory was created in a time when states were all under the surge, so differences were not as big or as important for the people inside those states. And third, Jstor theory assumes that there is a right side and wrong side into every conflict, which modern conflicts do not mimic. Since the complexity of geopolitical issues have grown significantly in modern times, an example of this is the Cold Wars between England and Iceland. Some conflicts are just too insignificant for a nation actor such as Germany or the US to take a side on. Why do we use war theory? Well, it provides a reliable framework in which We can assess decision making, but also, most importantly, it makes our decision making as humans more consistent, which is the main priority in many foreign relations agencies around the world, which is to make good decisions and decisions that are predictable and fair. War theory has become more relevant in the past few decades, especially since the 1994 Rwanda genocide, in which the international community failed to stop a genocide. Many people in the United States and United Nations use these sort of theories to ensure the safety and ethics of international organizations are being upheld and followed. Thank you for watching this short documentary. If you like this type of content, please subscribe and give it a like. It will really help me. In addition, if you like political science and international relations, this is the channel for you.